Okay, when you think about getting stronger, what's the first thing that comes to mind? For most of us, it's the lift itself, right? Pushing a barbell off your chest, pulling a deadlift off the floor. But what if I told you that a massive, and I mean massive, source of power has been hiding in the exact opposite motion? Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the science of eccentric training.
I want you to just sit with this question for a second. It kind of flips the script on how most of us have been taught to think in the gym. We're about to dive into some really compelling evidence that shows how controlling the weight on the way down, what a lot of people call the negative, might just be the untapped secret to smashing your next plateau and unlocking a whole new level of strength.
So, here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll get into the secret sauce, which is really the science of why this whole thing works. Then, we'll look at your 4 eccentric tools. These are the actual methods you can use in the gym. And finally, we'll bring it all together with building your plan, so you can walk away knowing exactly how to put this into practice.
All right, let's dive into section 1. We're starting with the why. What is it about that lengthening, lowering phase of a lift that sends such an incredibly powerful signal to our bodies to get bigger and stronger? Let's find out.
You know, it really all comes down to this one core concept, an eccentric muscle action. And put simply, all that means is your muscle is actively lengthening while it's still under tension. So you're not just dropping the weight, you are actively resisting it and controlling its descent. This is totally different from the concentric action, which is what we usually think of, where the muscle is shortening to lift the weight.
Let's make this super clear with a simple bicep curl. The concentric part, that's when you curl the weight up towards your shoulder. Your bicep bunches up, it shortens. The eccentric part is when you slowly lower that weight back down. Your bicep is lengthening, but it is fighting gravity the entire time. That control, that resistance on the way down, that's where the magic is happening.
And this is where things get absolutely wild. Get this, our muscles can produce anywhere from 20 to 60% more force during that lowering, eccentric phase than they can when lifting a weight. Just let that sink in for a second. It means that for every normal rep you do, the lowering part is actually kind of easy for your muscles because you're always limited by what you can lift up. You have this huge untapped strength reserve.
So what happens when we tap into that reserve? Well, handling those much higher forces triggers this amazing cascade of unique changes in your body. You send a way stronger muscle building signal. You specifically target those super powerful fast-twitch muscle fibers, the ones with the most potential for growth and speed. It can literally change the architecture of your muscles, building longer fibers by adding contractile units in a series. And finally, it makes the entire system, what we call the musculotendinous unit, or MTU, stiffer. Think of it like tightening the springs that connect your muscles to your bones, making you way more explosive.
Okay, so the why is pretty compelling, right? Now let's get into the how. How do we actually do this? We're going to look at 4 primary methods. I want you to think of them as 4 different tools in your training toolbox. Each one is designed for a slightly different job.
Here's just a quick snapshot of our 4 tools. And you can see right away, they're not all the same. Tempo training is pretty good for building muscle, but it's not going to do much for your power. On the flip side, plyometrics are an absolute engine for developing explosive power, but they're not the best for just putting on size. The real key here is knowing which tool to grab for the specific goal you have in mind.
So let's just quickly define these. Number 1, tempo training. This is the simplest one. You just slow down the lowering phase of any lift, say to a 3 or 5 second count. Number 2 is flywheel training. These are really cool inertial devices where the harder you pull to speed it up, the harder it pulls back on you on the way down. Then you have Accentuated Eccentric Loading, or AEL. This is a more advanced method where you are literally handling more weight on the way down than you lift up. And finally, plyometrics, things like depth jumps, which are all about training your muscles to absorb force like a spring and then explode.
All right, we've come to the final and honestly the most important section. How do you actually put all of this information together and build a plan? This is your blueprint for plugging these tools into your training based on your goals, your season, and even your current strength level.
First off, let's think about your training year. If you're in the off-season and your main goals are just building a solid base and maybe packing on some muscle, things like tempo training, flywheels, and AMODL are going to be your best friends. As you get closer to your season, you shift into a preseason phase. Now the focus is on strength and power, so AMODL and plyometrics become the primary tools. And once you're in season, you need to be fast, you need to be sharp. So you'd use very specific, high-velocity versions of AMODL and plyos to maintain that peak power without causing too much fatigue.
Okay, Now, this is where it gets really personal and incredibly useful. The right tools for you depend heavily on your current strength level. Let's use the squat as a benchmark. If you're a beginner squatting less than your body weight, you should really focus on tempo work to build control and maybe some low-level plyos to learn how to absorb force safely. As you get stronger, maybe squatting around 1.5 times your body weight, you can start to bring in more advanced things like ASEL. But if you're a truly advanced athlete squatting 2 times your body weight or more, well, to keep making progress, you need the most potent stimulus, and that's going to come from maximal ASEL and really high-intensity plyometrics.
So let's boil this all down. What are the key things you need to walk away with? First, remember that the lowering phase of a lift is a uniquely powerful stimulus for getting bigger and stronger. Second, your muscles are hiding a massive reserve of strength. They can handle 20 to 60% more load on the way down. Third, you've got 4 main tools in your toolbox to tap into that potential. And finally, and most importantly, the best tool always depends on your specific goal and where you are right now in your training journey. Look, the lifting phase, the concentric, it gets all the glory. We all love to see the weight go up. But now you know the secret. It's the lowering phase, this forgotten phase, that's doing so much of the heavy lifting when it comes to building a stronger, more powerful you. So the question isn't really if you should be focusing on it anymore, it's how. How are you going to start using it to break through your next barrier?